phone rang just as I was about to have a quiet dinner. It was my son, Mark, his voice filled with an artificial enthusiasm that set off an immediate alarm. "Dad," he said, "I have amazing news. We sold the house for $700,000. I nearly choked on my meatloaf. The fork clattered onto my plate as a cold dread settled in my stomach. "Mark, that's... Wait, what? You sold the house?" He laughed, a brittle sound that held no joy. "Can you believe it? The market's incredible right now. We got way more than we expected." The house was a place I had helped them buy, a place I considered a foundation for their future, and now it was gone. He said they had to move fast, that the buyers came with cash, and they couldn't pass it up. My legs felt unsteady, and I walked to the living room, gripping the phone tightly. "Mark, where will you live now?" I asked. There was a pause. In the background, I heard traffic noise and a car door slamming. "We'll figure it out, Dad. Don't worry about us. The important thing is we made this incredible profit." I sank into my favorite armchair, the one facing the mantel with my late wife Mary's photograph on it. "Things? What kind of things?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He seemed to brush the question off with a hint of irritation. "Oh, you know, Cassidy has her eye on some designer furniture, maybe that new Mercedes she's been wanting, and there's this amazing spa vacation she found." The words felt like a physical blow. The coldness in my stomach spread upward, turning into a bitter resentment. I thought back to the day I gave them the money, the day they stood in my kitchen, full of dreams and promises. But now, all those promises seemed to mean nothing. I wanted to believe it was a bad joke, but the tone of his voice and the cold reality of his words told me otherwise. "What about the $300,000 I gave you for that house?" I asked, my voice low and controlled. A long silence followed, punctuated only by the distant sounds of city life. I wondered if the call had dropped, but I knew it hadn't. "Dad," he finally said, his voice laced with a condescending defensiveness, "you gave us that money. Now it's our money. We can do what we want with it." My hands trembled as I held the receiver. I stared at Mary's smiling face in the silver frame. Her patient eyes seemed to watch me. "Our money? Mark, that was a loan. We discussed it, didn't we?" He laughed again, a harsh, unfamiliar sound. "Did we? I don't remember signing any loan papers." "Dad, that was just talk. You know how these family things go." The casual dismissal of my generosity and my trust was breathtaking. It felt like a punch to the gut. "Besides," he continued, as if reading my mind, "you don't need the money. You've got that big house, your pension, Mom's life insurance. You should be happy for us. Isn't that what parents want?" His words felt like a direct attack. I stood up, walked to my study, and pulled out the manila folder I kept there. It was a file I had hoped to never open again. "Mark, I have the bank records right here. $300,000 withdrawn from my retirement account. You said it was for your dream house, that you'd pay me back." I could hear his impatience. "Dad, let it go. We're family. Family helps each other." I shook my head in silent disbelief. "Help each other? What about helping me? What about honoring your word?" But he was already pulling away, his voice filled with a finality that made my blood run cold. "Look, I've got to run. Cassidy's waiting in the car. We have things to do. Thanks for being understanding about this." The dial tone buzzed in my ear, leaving me alone in the silent house with the echo of his words. That night, after the phone call, I couldn't bring myself to finish my dinner. The meatloaf, usually a comfort, now felt like ash in my mouth. I rinsed the plate and placed it in the dishwasher, going through the motions of a routine that had always brought me a quiet sense of order. Now, it felt like an empty ritual. I walked to my study and sat down at the large mahogany desk I had bought with my late wife, Mary. A sense of overwhelming defeat washed over me, not just for the $300,000, but for the trust that was so carelessly broken. I pulled out the manila folder, the very one I had shown to Mark over the phone. Inside were the bank records, a withdrawal of $300,000, dated 3 years ago. I had done it without a second thought. My son had needed help, and I was in a position to give it. Mary would have been proud. She believed in family and taking care of our own, but she also believed in honoring one's word. The memory of that day came back to me with a painful clarity. Mark and Cassidy, sitting at my kitchen table, their faces alight with a mixture of hope and anxiety. They had found their dream house but were short on the down payment. "We've never asked you for anything like this, but we didn't know where else to turn," Cassidy had said, her smile bright and grateful. I remember looking at their young faces, filled with dreams and possibility, and a deep sense of pride swelled in my chest. "Of course, son, I'll help. This is for your family." The relief on Mark's face was immediate and genuine. He had stood up and hugged me, something he hadn't done in years. "Dad, you're the best. We'll definitely pay you back. I know this is a lot of money." I told him not to rush, that their happiness was all that mattered. Cassidy had tears in her eyes, thanking me over and over. She called me the most generous father-in-law in the world. I had believed every word. I had felt like the luckiest man alive, capable of providing for my son and his family. I had felt like a hero. Now, the memory felt like a joke, a cruel, humiliating joke. I had been a fool. I walked to the living room and stood before Mary's photograph. Her patient, knowing smile seemed to mock me. What would she have said? I knew the answer. Mary never let anyone walk on her, especially not family. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Jeremy who had hugged me, who had promised to pay me back, was gone. He had become a stranger, a man who laughed at my trust and called my generosity foolish. The pain was no longer a dull ache. It was a sharp, searing anger that felt like a fire in my chest. My hands, which had been trembling with hurt, now clenched into fists. I went back to my study, the folder of documents in my hand. This wasn't just paper anymore. It was evidence. Evidence of my own foolishness, but also evidence of their betrayal. I had to do something. I had to reclaim not just the money, but my dignity. I spent the rest of the evening in my study, the quiet of the house, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I meticulously organized the bank statements, the thank you card, every piece of evidence of the loan and their promises. I was an engineer by trade, a man who believed in systems, in logic, in solving problems, and my son had just become the biggest problem of my life. I couldn't just let this go. They had stolen from me, and they had laughed about it. The thought of them spending my money on luxury items while I sat alone in this house was unbearable. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't be the foolish old man they expected me to be. Mary wouldn't have wanted that. She had always told me that being nice didn't mean being weak. I closed the folder and secured it back in the desk drawer. The documents would still be there tomorrow, still a record of a trust that had been shattered. But tonight, for the first time since that phone call, I felt something besides shock and hurt. I felt a cold, hard resolve. I was ready to fight. The pounding on my front door shattered the quiet morning like gunfire. I jolted awake, squinting at the bedside clock. It was 7:15 ampere. The knocking came again, more aggressive and demanding this time. I stumbled to the window and pulled back the curtain. A moving truck sat in my driveway. My son Mark's car was parked behind it, the trunk open, suitcases visible. A wave of cold dread washed over me. The knocking resumed, more violent than before. I threw on my robe and slippers and hurried downstairs, my hands shaking as I turned the deadbolt. Mark stood on my porch, grinning like it was Christmas morning. Behind him, his wife Cassidy held a designer suitcase, her makeup already perfect despite the early hour. "Hi, Dad," Mark said cheerfully. "We're here." I blinked at them, still processing. "What does this mean, Mark?" I asked. "Well, since we sold the house, we need somewhere to stay." He gestured toward the moving truck, as if its presence explained everything. "We'll stay with you temporarily, just until we find something suitable." The cold October air bit through my thin robe. "Number? Absolutely not," I said firmly, stepping into the doorway and gripping the frame. "You don't belong here." Mark's smile faltered for just a moment. "Dad, don't be selfish," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You have this big house, and we're your family." He moved forward, intending to push past me, but I held my ground. This was my home, and I would not let them take it from me. "This is my home," I repeated. "You made your choices." "Our choices," Cassidy's voice was sharp as broken glass. We're family. Family helps each other in times of need. I stared at her perfectly styled hair, her expensive jacket, the diamond earrings catching the morning light. Times of need? You just sold a house for $700,000. That money's already allocated, Mark said, his tone turning cold. Cassidy has needs, Dad. Important needs. More important than having a place to live. The audacity was breathtaking. From across the street, I noticed my neighbor Harold, pretending to read his paper but clearly listening. Mrs. Chen's curtains twitched at her window. My son was making a scene, a public display of his entitlement. Dad, you're being unreasonable, Mark's voice carried across the quiet neighborhood. We're not asking for charity. After you stole $300,000 from me? I shot back. We didn't steal anything, Cassidy said, stepping forward, her face flushing red. You gave us that money freely. It was a loan, I countered. Where's the paperwork? Mark challenged, a sneer on his face. Show me the signed loan documents. The morning was getting colder, and I pulled my robe tighter. More neighbors were visible now, drawn by the commotion. You know there are no papers, I said quietly. I trusted my own son. Well, maybe you shouldn't be so trusting, Cassidy snapped. Maybe you should have thought harder before making promises you'd regret. That's enough, Mark said, but he didn't sound sorry, just tired. No, it's not enough, she shouted, her voice rising. You're a selfish old man sitting in this huge house all alone. We're young. We have our whole lives ahead of us, and you want us to suffer because of your buyer's remorse. I felt a familiar stillness settle over me, the calm that precedes a storm. I want you to leave my property, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Dad, you'll regret this decision, Mark said, his voice now a threat. Family is supposed to stick together. When you're old and sick and need help, remember this moment. Is that a threat, son? I asked. It's reality, Dad. You're not getting any younger. Cassidy stepped even closer, her expensive perfume filling the air. You'll change your mind. You'll come begging us to come back. And maybe we'll consider it. Get off my property, I said. That's when she slapped me. The sound cracked across the morning air like a whip. My head snapped back, my cheeks stinging, and I stumbled against the door frame. The humiliation burned worse than the physical pain. Harold dropped his newspaper and stepped forward. Hey, that's enough! Mark grabbed Cassidy's arm, pulling her back toward the car. Come on, we're done here. You'll regret your greed! Cassidy shouted over her shoulder as Mark dragged her away. You'll regret being such a selfish, bitter old man! They threw their suitcases into the trunk, Mark slamming it so hard the whole car shook. As they drove away, tires squealing against the asphalt, Harold approached with concern written across his weathered face. I touched my stinging cheek, aware that half the neighborhood had just witnessed my son's wife assault me on my own front porch. The morning air felt even colder now, but I remained standing in my doorway, watching their car disappear around the corner. Harold approached slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. Willard, friend, you did the right thing, he said, his voice steady but calm. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. I touched my cheek where Cassidy's hand had landed. The sting was already fading, but the humiliation burned deeper. Did you see what happened? I asked Harold, though I knew he had. Every bit of it. So did Tom Patterson over there, and the Johnsons. If you need witnesses to what that woman did, you've got them. He was right. In the eyes of the law, what Cassidy had done was assault, plain and simple. I raised him better than this, I said, more to myself than to Harold. Sometimes kids go wrong despite good raising, Harold replied. The question now is what you plan to do about it. What did I plan to do? Just 24 hours ago, I had been a peaceful widower, enjoying his quiet retirement. Now I was a man who had been threatened and struck by his own family. Harold's words hung in the air. Willard, if you decide to take legal action, you'll have support. This neighborhood has your back. Mrs. Chen and the Johnsons murmured similar offers, their presence a silent testimony to the fact that my private humiliation had become a very public affair. After they had all gone, I stood alone in my front yard, touching my face again. The physical pain was minimal, but something else had changed. The man who had answered Mark's phone call Friday night was gone, replaced by someone harder, more determined. I walked back to my front door, pausing to look at the tire marks Mark's car had left on my driveway. Evidence of their hasty retreat, their guilty knowledge of what they'd done. Inside, the house felt different, not violated, but somehow more fortress-like. My sanctuary had been threatened, but it had held, and I was still here, still standing, still the owner of this place they tried to claim. The red mark on my cheek would fade, but the clarity it had brought me would not. The bathroom mirror showed me a stranger, not the defeated old man Mark probably expected, but someone with steel in his eyes, and a red handprint on his left cheek, like a badge of war. I touched the tender skin gently. Cassidy's ring had left a small scratch near my ear. Evidence, I realized. Proof of what she'd done. But I needed more than evidence of assault. I needed strategy. Walking to my study, I felt different, steadier, more focused than I had been since Mary's death. The morning's humiliation had burned away something soft in me, revealing the engineer I'd always been underneath, methodical, practical, uncompromising when it came to solving problems. Mark was a problem that needed solving. I settled into my favorite armchair and opened the desk drawer where I kept important documents. My filing system was alphabetical and precise, a habit from 40 years of engineering work. Under M for Mark, I found the folder I was looking for. The loan agreement, a document Mark had been so reluctant to sign, was exactly where I'd left it, in a manila envelope marked Mark House Loan 2021. I pulled it out carefully, handling the papers like the legal weapons they were. Mary's photograph watched me from the desk, her smile encouraging. She had always said I was too trusting when it came to family, too willing to give without protecting myself. Fight for justice, Arthur, she told me once. Being nice doesn't mean being weak. It was time to stop being nice. The contract was 8 pages long, typed on my attorney, Samuel Grant's, official letterhead. I put on my reading glasses and examined every clause, every paragraph, every word that Mark had agreed to when he signed his name 3 years ago. Principal amount, $300,000. Term, 5 years. Default clause. If payments were missed for more than 90 days, the entire balance became immediately due. Mark hadn't made a single payment, not a single dollar in nearly 3 years. According to the contract, he owed me $300,000 plus accumulated interest at 8% annually. I reached for my calculator, the same one I'd used for engineering calculations for decades. Principal, $300,000. Interest for 3 years, $72,000. Total amount due, $370,000. $2,000. My hands were steady as I wrote the figures on a legal pad. Mark thought he was clever, claiming the money was a gift. But contracts don't lie, and signatures don't disappear because someone finds them inconvenient. I leaned back in my chair, holding the document up to the morning light streaming through my study window. Mark's signature was clear, witnessed by my attorney and notarized. Legal, binding, and enforceable. For the first time since Friday night's phone call, I smiled. The boy who'd thrown tantrums when he didn't get his way, who'd learned to manipulate rather than earn, who'd brought that woman to strike me in my own yard. That boy had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his father. I organized the papers carefully, making copies with my home scanner. Another habit from my engineering days. Always have backups. Always document everything. Always be prepared. The original documents went back into their folder, which went back into the drawer, which I locked with the small key I kept on my keyboard. The copies went into a second folder, marked Legal Action, Mark. Outside, I could hear normal Saturday morning sounds. Lawnmowers, children playing, dogs barking. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But something fundamental had shifted in my world. Mark wasn't my little boy anymore. He was a man who'd stolen from his father and allowed his wife to assault me. He was someone who needed to learn that actions have consequences. I looked at Mary's photograph again, imagining her approval of my methodical approach. She'd married an engineer, after all. She knew I was capable of more than just kindness. The phone sat on my desk. My attorney Samuel Grant's number programmed into memory, but not yet. First, I needed to plan exactly what I wanted from this confrontation. Revenge was a dish best served cold, Mary used to say, though she was usually talking about dinner leftovers. The contract felt solid in my hands. a bridge between Mark's promises and his accountability, between his assumptions and reality. I settled deeper into my chair and began to read the document again, this time looking for every advantage, every legal tool at my disposal. The morning was young, and I had work to do. Mark's signature stared up at me from the bottom of the final page, hasty but legible. The same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and school reports for 35 years. But something about it triggered a specific memory, sharp and clear as yesterday. Summer 2021. Samuel's office downtown, the leather chairs still holding the afternoon heat. Legal diplomas arranged precisely on mahogany paneled walls. Mark had been fidgeting with his wedding ring while I explained why we needed documentation. "Dad, why don't you trust me?" he'd asked, his voice carrying that edge of hurt he'd perfected as a teenager. "This isn't about trust," I'd replied, watching Samuel organize the contract pages on his conference table. "This is about responsibility, about doing things properly." The memory felt as real as the morning light streaming through my study window. Samuel had been wearing his Navy suit that day, the one he saved for important client meetings. He'd arranged coffee for all three of us, though Mark barely touched his. "Mr. Brooks," Samuel had said, addressing Mark with professional courtesy. "This contract protects both you and your father. It establishes clear terms for repayment and prevents any future misunderstandings." Mark had shifted in his chair, looking everywhere except at the documents. "Dad, we're family. Why do we need lawyers and contracts for family?" "Because family doesn't mean foolish," I answered. "Your mother always said, the clearest agreements make the best relationships." That had been the moment. Mark's expression changing from hurt to something harder, more calculated. Even then, 3 years ago, I'd seen a glimpse of the man who would eventually laugh at my trust and allow his wife to strike me. "Fine, Dad," he'd said finally, reaching for Samuel's expensive pen, "if it makes you feel better." But it hadn't made him feel bad. I could see that now, remembering how his hand had hesitated before each signature, how he'd asked twice about the default clauses, how his voice had tightened when Samuel explained that the full amount would become due immediately if he missed payments. "Mr. Brooks," Samuel had said to Mark, "do you understand that this creates a legal obligation? This isn't a gift that can be forgotten or ignored." "I understand," Mark had replied, though his tone suggested he understood nothing except that he needed to sign to get the money. The irony was perfect. Mark's reluctance to sign had been my first warning that he wasn't taking the agreement seriously. But his signature, reluctant or not, made the contract legally binding. I closed my eyes, remembering the rest of that afternoon. After the signing, we'd walked to the parking garage together. Mark had been quiet, processing what had just happened. "Dad, you know I'm good for this money, right?" "Of course, son. That's why I'm giving it to you. The contract makes it feel businesslike. That doesn't mean I love you less." He'd hugged me then, quickly and awkwardly, before getting into his car. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." Those had been the last grateful words I'd heard from my son. Now, sitting in my study 3 years later, with his signature under my reading glasses, I understood what Samuel had been protecting me from. Not Mark's inability to repay the loan, but his unwillingness to acknowledge it existed. The contract was Samuel's gift to me, though I hadn't fully appreciated it at the time. Every clause, every term, every legal protection had been crafted by a man who understood both law and human nature. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found Samuel's number. This couldn't wait until Monday. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Willard, everything all right?" Samuel asked, his tone shifting from personal friend to professional attorney. "What's happened?" I explained everything: the phone call, the sale of the house, Mark's arrogance, and finally the morning's confrontation. "They sold the house for $700,000, I said, my voice trembling with contained fury. "Mark called to tell me the money was theirs now, and that he never intended to repay the loan. Then, yesterday morning, he and Cassidy came here, demanding to move in. When I refused, she struck me. A stunned silence followed. "She... what?" Samuel's voice was a whisper. "She struck me in front of witnesses." The words hung in the air, heavy with humiliation. When Samuel spoke again, his voice was granted hard. "Willard, I can meet you at my office in 2 hours. Bring that contract with you. All of it. The whole thing. Every page, every signature, every witness mark. It's time your son learned what his signature actually means. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and looked at Manny's photograph. She was smiling in that picture, the way she did when she was proud of a decision I made. The contract felt heavier in my hands now. Not just paper and ink, but justice waiting to be served. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Samuel's elegant office. The mahogany conference table held neat stacks of legal documents, and Samuel sat across from me, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Brooks, a younger lawyer named David Morrison, began. My client is prepared to offer a settlement that we believe is fair to all parties. He was younger than Samuel, with the nervous energy of someone who had taken a bad case and was trying to minimize the damage. I'd researched him after Samuel mentioned his name, a recent law school graduate, mostly handling traffic violations in small claims court. Let's hear it, Samuel said, his tone professional but skeptical. Mr. Jeremy Brooks is prepared to acknowledge the loan and agree to a payment plan, $50,000 immediately, then monthly payments of $2,000 until the debt is satisfied. I did quick mental math. At that rate, it would take 12 years to pay off the principal alone. I was 68 years old. Absolutely not, I said before Samuel could respond. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Brooks, my client has limited resources. The house sale proceeds have been allocated to other expenses. Allocated to a Mercedes and designer furniture, Samuel interjected. We've done our research, Mr. Morrison. Your client spent $300,000 in 6 weeks on luxury items while planning to move into our client's home without permission. Those purchases were made in good faith. Good faith? I leaned forward, feeling the controlled anger I'd learned to harness over the past 2 weeks. Your client struck me in my own front yard. Where's the good faith in that? Morrison glanced at his notes nervously. My client is prepared to have Mrs. Brooks issue a written apology for that incident. Samuel's laugh was cold and professional. Your client committed assault and battery in front of multiple witnesses. A written apology doesn't address civil damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. What are you looking for? Morrison asked, defeat creeping into his voice. Samuel slid a document across the table. Full payment of principal and accrued interest, $372,000 within 90 days. If payment isn't made, we'll proceed with asset seizure and wage garnishment. That's impossible. They don't have that kind of money. Then they need to liquidate their luxury purchases, I said calmly. Sell the Mercedes, return the designer furniture, liquidate whatever assets they bought with my money. Morrison read Samuel's document, his face growing paler with each paragraph. This also includes civil damages for the assault, $50,000 for assault, emotional distress, and public humiliation. Very reasonable, considering the circumstances. So, you're demanding 422, zero total. We're demanding justice, he said. Your client stole from me, attempted to move into my home without permission, and physically assaulted me when I refused. These are the consequences of their choices. Morrison excused himself to make a phone call, presumably to me. I sat back in my chair, holding the contract with a newfound sense of power. The battle had just begun, and I was holding all the cards. The afternoon was shifting, casting longer shadows across my desk. Mark was probably at work, unaware that his world was about to change. Cassidy was likely spending their windfall on whatever caught her fancy, equally oblivious to what was coming. They had treated me like a fool, a resource to be exploited and discarded. But fools don't keep meticulous records, don't consult lawyers, and don't fight back with precision and planning. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad, writing Mark legal action at the top in my careful engineer's handwriting. Below it, I listed Samuel's timeline. Demand letter, 2 weeks for court filing, discovery process, trial preparation. For the first time since Friday night, I was looking forward to Monday morning. Monday evening arrived with autumn's early darkness. I had spent the day reviewing Samuel's strategy, organizing documents, and preparing for what would either be Mark's capitulation or his declaration of war. At 6:45 p.m. I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the third ring, sounding tired and distracted. Yeah, Dad. Mark, I'm calling to demand immediate repayment of the $300,000 loan I provided for your house purchase. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Dad, have you completely lost your mind? What loan are you talking about? His voice carried that familiar edge of condescension, the tone he used since college whenever he thought I was being unreasonable. The loan documented in our signed contract from June 2021. You violated the terms by selling the house without repayment. The acceleration clause makes the full amount immediately due. What contract, Dad? You gave us that money as a gift. There's no contract. I looked down at the 8-page document spread before me. Mark's signature was clear on the final page. Mark, you signed a legal agreement. My lawyer prepared it, his secretary witnessed it, and it was notarized. The contract exists, and it's enforceable. His laugh was harsh. Brittle. That worthless piece of paper doesn't mean anything. You can't seriously think. I think you owe me $372,000 principal plus interest, as specified in the agreement you signed. Dad, you've really gone off the deep end. Just try to collect. Go ahead and try. Very well, Mark. We'll see you in court. The words came out calm and final. Court? You're threatening to sue your own son over money you gave as a gift? What kind of father does that? The kind who keeps his word and expects others to keep theirs. The kind who doesn't tolerate being struck by his daughter-in-law in his own front yard. That was barely a slap. You're making it sound like assault, because that's exactly what it was. Battery committed in front of witnesses. My neighbor Harold saw everything. So did the Johnsons and Mrs. Chen. Mark's breathing was audible through the phone, quick and shallow. The cocky dismissal was cracking, replaced by something sharper, more desperate. Dad, this is insane. You're talking about destroying our family over money. You destroyed our family when you decided my generosity made me a fool. I'm simply seeking legal remedy for breach of contract. I'll fight you, I'll get my own lawyer, and we'll prove that contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. I hope you do get a lawyer, Mark. Any competent attorney will explain that signed contracts are legally binding, regardless of family relationships. The line went quiet, except for Mark's labored breathing and what sounded like Cassidy's voice in the background, sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. This isn't over, Dad. You'll regret this decision. We'll find ways to fight back that you won't see coming. Mark, I'm documenting every threat you make. My attorney is very interested in your responses to legal demands. The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and immediately picked it up again, dialing Samuel's home number. Willard, how did it go? He asked. Exactly as you predicted. Complete denial, followed by threats when he realized I was serious. He claims the contract is worthless paper and says he'll fight us in court. Perfect. Denial of a valid contract in the face of clear evidence. That's going to cost him additional attorney fees when we win. Did you document the conversation? Every word, including his admission that Cassidy's assault was barely a slap, and his threats about finding ways to fight back. Samuel's chuckle was warm and professional. Willard, your son just handed us additional evidence for our case. The demand letter goes out first thing tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I reviewed my notes from the call, writing down Mark's exact words while they were fresh in memory. His panic had been obvious beneath the bluster, and his threats only strengthened our legal position. The contract lay before me, no longer just paper and ink, but a sword of justice, sharp and ready for battle. Mark had called my bluff, and now he was about to learn it wasn't a bluff at all. Thursday evening's quiet was shattered by my phone's aggressive ringing. I glanced at the caller ID. Mark, I checked my watch. 8:30 p.m., right on schedule. Samuel's certified demand letter had been delivered that morning. Dad, what is this legal summons? Jeremy's voice cracked with panic, the cocky dismissal from Monday completely gone. In the background, I could hear Cassidy's voice, shrill and hostile. Mark, you received Samuel's demand letter, I said calmly. You have 10 days to respond with full payment. Full payment, Dad? Where am I supposed to get $300,000? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. He had blown through the $700,000 from the house sale, and couldn't scrape together half that amount. His financial desperation was now crystal clear. That's not my concern. You signed a contract, Mark. Honor your obligations. Family should stick together. How can you do this to your own blood? I'd been expecting this. The emotional manipulation, the guilt about family loyalty. But something had changed in me since Saturday morning's assault. The man who would have wavered at those words was gone. You chose this path when you decided to steal from me and let your wife strike me. Actions have consequences. Mom would never approve of this. She'd want the family to stay together. His invocation of Mary's memory hit like a physical blow, but not in the way he intended. Instead of guilt, I felt a surge of protective anger. Your mother would be appalled by your behavior. She believed in integrity, Mark, and keeping promises and treating people with respect. It was just a slap, nothing serious. You're making it sound like attempted murder. There it was. Mark's admission recorded and documented. Samuel would be very interested in this particular confession. Tell me, Mark, would you allow someone to slap your mother and call it nothing serious? Silence, then the sound of heated whispering. Cassidy's voice became clearer, more aggressive. Give me that phone, I heard her demand, then shouting toward the receiver. You selfish old man, you're destroying this family over money. Mrs. Brooks, I said formally, your voice is being recorded. Continue making threats if you'd like them documented for court proceedings. The phone was apparently jerked away from Cassidy. Mark's voice returned, but shakier now. Dad, please. We can work this out, family to family. No lawyers, no courts, just us talking like reasonable people. We had that conversation on Monday. You called the contract worthless paper and threatened to fight me in court. Now you're getting exactly what you asked for. You'll regret this. We'll find ways to stop you, ways you won't see coming. Mark, I'm documenting every threat you make. Each hostile word becomes additional evidence in your civil case. Civil case, assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and now intimidation of a witness. Your wife struck me in front of multiple neighbors, and you're threatening retaliation for pursuing legal remedies. The breathing on the other end became rapid, panicked. Mark was finally understanding the full scope of his legal exposure. Dad, we don't have that kind of money. Even if we wanted to pay, which we don't, we can't. Then you'll need to figure out how to liquidate assets, Mark. Sell Cassidy's Mercedes, her jewelry, whatever you bought with my money, or the court will do it for you. This is blackmail. This is contract enforcement. There's a significant legal difference. More background shouting from Cassidy, then Mark's voice, strained and desperate. Fine. If you want to tear this family apart, you've succeeded. When this is over, you'll never see us again. I'm looking forward to that outcome. The line went dead. I immediately dialed Samuel's number, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Willard, I take it, Mark received our letter. Complete panic, followed by manipulation attempts, followed by threats. He admitted the assault occurred, said they don't have the money, and threatened retaliation for pursuing legal action. Outstanding. Panic means he consulted a lawyer who explained his actual legal position. The threats give us additional civil causes of action. How do you feel? I looked at my neat handwriting documenting Mark's panic and desperation, then at Mary's photograph, smiling encouragingly from the desk. Samuel, I feel like a man who's finally stopped being pushed around. Good, because tomorrow we file everything in court. Mark's about to learn that some mistakes can't be undone with charm and manipulation. Oh, Friday morning brought unseasonable warmth, and a concerned herald to my front door, coffee mug in hand. Willard, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I've been thinking about what happened last weekend. I invited him in, grateful for the company. The house had felt different since I'd started the legal proceedings, not lonely, but expectant, like a theater before the curtain rises. Actually, I wanted you to know something, Harold said. The whole neighborhood's talking about what your son and his wife did, and not in a good way for them. We settled into my kitchen, the same spot where Mark had once sat begging for money with promises he never intended to keep. What kind of talk? I asked. Well, Mrs. Chen saw the moving truck Saturday morning. She was getting her newspaper when she heard the shouting. By the time that woman slapped you, half the street was watching. Tom Patterson's been telling everyone about it. Says he's never seen anything like it. A grown woman striking an elderly man in his own front yard. People are upset, Willard. Really upset. The validation was unexpected and deeply satisfying. I'd spent decades being the quiet neighbor, the man who kept to himself and caused no trouble. Now, when I needed community support, it was there. Harold, I need to tell you something. I filed a lawsuit against Mark, contract violation and civil damages for the assault. Harold's eyebrows rose, but his expression remained supportive. Good for you. About time someone held that boy accountable. You'll have them, he said, referring to the witnesses. Mrs. Chen's already said she'd testify if needed, so have the Johnsons and Tom Patterson. A knock at the door interrupted us. It was Mrs. Chen, holding a covered dish of soup. Willard, dear, I brought you some soup, she said when I opened the door. Her usual gentle demeanor was replaced by something fiercer. I heard about the legal troubles with her son. News travels fast in this neighborhood. What that woman did to you was shameful. After she left, Harold and I sat in comfortable silence, processing the unexpected community solidarity. How do you feel about all this, suing your own son? Harold asked. I feel relieved. For the first time in years, I'm not being taken advantage of. I'm not being treated like a fool or a resource to be exploited. I'm finally fighting back. Harold nodded slowly. Mary would be proud. Your son needed to learn that his actions have consequences. Better he learn it from you than from the world, which would have been much less forgiving. That afternoon, I received a call from Sammy. Willard, Mark's attorney, contacted my office today. They want to negotiate already. Panic makes people move quickly. His lawyer understands the strength of our case. I knew this was coming. Mark's initial bluster had been a desperate attempt to regain control, but the legal reality was now sinking in. Signed contracts are hard to argue with, and an assault charge with multiple witnesses makes for a legal nightmare. What kind of negotiation? I asked. A payment plan, probably. Maybe a partial settlement. The important thing is they're acknowledging the debt exists. That's a major victory right there. After hanging up, I walked to my study window and looked out at the quiet street. Mrs. Chen was watering her flowers. Harold was checking his mailbox. Life continued its normal rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the one with the power. I had all the leverage. My phone sat silent on my desk. The silence a stark contrast to the flurry of activity on the other side. Mark was probably panicking, and Cassidy was likely furious, as they realized they couldn't simply manipulate their way out of this. The mahogany conference table in Samuel's office felt different this time. It was the headquarters of a successful campaign. Mark's attorney, David Morrison, sat across from us, looking distinctly uncomfortable. I had researched him and knew he was a recent law school graduate who mostly handled traffic violations in small claims court. He was clearly in over his head. Mr. Brooks, Morrison began, my client is prepared to offer a settlement that we believe is fair to all parties. He will acknowledge the loan and agree to a payment plan. $50,000 immediately, then monthly payments of $2,000 until the debt is satisfied. I did the mental math quickly. 12 years to pay off the principal alone. I was 68. Absolutely not, I said before Samuel could respond. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. My client has limited resources. The house sale proceeds have been allocated to other expenses. Allocated to a Mercedes and designer furniture, Samuel interjected. We've done our research, Mr. Morrison. Your client spent $300,000 in 6 weeks on luxury items while planning to move into my client's home without permission. Those purchases were made in good faith. I leaned forward, the controlled anger I'd learned to harness now a potent weapon. Your client struck me in my own front yard. Where's the good faith in that? Morrison glanced nervously at his notes. My client is prepared to have Mrs. Brooks issue a written apology for that incident. Samuel's laugh was cold and professional. Your client committed assault and battery in front of multiple witnesses. A written apology doesn't address civil damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. What are you looking for? Morrison asked, defeat creeping into his voice. Samuel slid a document across the table. Full payment of principal and accrued interest, $372,000 within 90 days. If payment isn't made, We'll proceed with asset seizure and wage garnishment. That's impossible. They don't have that kind of money. Then they need to liquidate their luxury purchases, I said calmly. Sell the Mercedes, return the designer furniture, liquidate whatever assets they bought with my money. Morrison excused himself to make a phone call to Mark. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see him pacing and gesturing frantically. How do you think Mark's taking this? I asked Samuel. About as well as you'd expect. His cheap lawyer probably told him he could negotiate this down to a manageable payment plan. Now he's learning that stealing from your father has real consequences. Morrison returned, looking defeated. My client needs time to consider your terms. He has 48 hours, Samuel said. After that, we proceed with full legal action, including asset seizure and wage garnishment. The Illinois court system is very efficient when it comes to contract enforcement. After Morrison left, Samuel and I remained in the conference room. Willard, I think they'll settle. Mark's probably calling every bank in Chicago trying to get a loan, but his debt-to-income ratio makes him a terrible risk. His only option is liquidating those luxury purchases. I sat quietly, looking at the framed photograph of Mary. You'd enjoy this, I told her picture. Our son is finally learning that actions have consequences. The phone sat silent on my desk. 46 hours remained for Mark to decide between voluntary payment and legal asset seizure. For the first time in 2 weeks, I was genuinely curious to see what choice he'd make. The call came at exactly 5:47 p.m. on the second day. I was reading in my study when the phone rang, Mark's name appearing on the caller ID. Dad, he said, his voice hollow and defeated. We accept your terms. No threats, no manipulation, no appeals to family loyalty. All of that was gone, replaced by the grim reality of the situation. All of them, he continued. Every last one. We'll have the money within 30 days. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. After 35 years of giving in to his demands, I had finally learned the power of letting Mark fill the quiet spaces with his own discomfort. We had to sell everything, Dad, he said, the words heavy with resignation. The Mercedes, all of Cassidy's designer furniture, her jewelry. We took out loans against my salary. We're basically starting over. Good, I said simply. Good? That's all you have to say? The old Mark was trying to surface, the one who expected sympathy even when facing the consequences of his own actions. But I was no longer the man who provided it. Mark, you stole from me, demanded to live in my house, and allowed your wife to assault me. Starting over seems like appropriate justice. She wants to apologize for hitting me, he said. I'll accept her written apology as specified in the settlement agreement. Dad, after this is over, after we pay you back, can we try to rebuild our relationship? The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I heard echoes of the little boy who used to help me fix things in the garage, who brought me drawings from school, who called me the best dad in the world. But that boy had grown into a man who viewed kindness as weakness and generosity as foolishness. Mark, you can rebuild your relationship with me the same way you'll rebuild your financial life, I said. One trustworthy action at a time, over many years, with no guarantee of success. That's harsh. That's reality. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. After hanging up, I called Samuel to report Mark's acceptance of our terms. Congratulations, Willard, he said. You've just taught a very expensive lesson about the importance of honoring contracts and treating people with respect. Samuel, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Thank me after the money's in your account, but yes, this has been one of the more satisfying cases of my career. It's not often I get to see justice served so clearly. 2 weeks later, the electronic transfer appeared in my bank account. $422,000, representing not just repayment with interest and damages, but validation that some fights are worth having. I printed the bank statement and filed it next to the original loan contract, creating a complete record of Mark's expensive education and personal responsibility. That evening, my neighbor Harold stopped by with a bottle of wine. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that your son paid up. He did. Good for you, Willard. You showed real courage standing up to family like that. We sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint the quiet street in golden light, the same street where Cassidy had struck me 3 weeks earlier. where neighbors had witnessed my humiliation and rallied to support me. Harold, can I ask you something? I asked. Do you think I was too hard on them? Harold considered this carefully. Willard, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's enabling. Your son needed to learn that his actions have consequences. Better he learn it from you than from the world, which would have been much less forgiving. That night, I sat in my study with a glass of Mary's favorite wine, looking at the framed photograph of us at our last anniversary dinner. She was laughing at something I'd said, her eyes bright with love and mischief. You'd enjoy this, I told her picture. Our son is finally learning that actions have consequences. The phone sat silent on my desk. For the first time in 2 weeks, I was genuinely curious to see what choice he'd made. The call came at exactly 5:47 p.m. on the second day. I was reading in my study when the phone rang, Mark's name appearing on the caller ID. Dad, he said, his voice hollow and defeated. We accept your terms. No threats, no manipulation, no appeals to family loyalty. All of that was gone, replaced by the grim reality of this situation. All of them, he continued, every last one, will have the money within 30 days. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. After 35 years of giving in to his demands, I had finally learned the power of letting Mark fill the quiet spaces with his own discomfort. We had to sell everything, Dad, he said, the words heavy with resignation. The Mercedes, all of Cassidy's designer furniture, her jewelry. We took out loans against my salary. We're basically starting over. Good, I said simply. Good? That's all you have to say? The old Mark was trying to surface, the one who expected sympathy even when facing the consequences of his own actions. But I was no longer the man who provided it. Mark, you stole from me, demanded to live in my house, and allowed your wife to assault me. Starting over seems like appropriate justice. She wants to apologize for hitting me. I'll accept her written apology, as specified in the settlement agreement. Dad, after this is over, after we pay you back, can we try to rebuild our relationship? The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I heard echoes of the little boy who used to help me fix things in the garage, who brought me drawings from school, who called me the best dad in the world. But that boy had grown into a man who viewed kindness as weakness and generosity as foolishness. Mark, you can rebuild your relationship with me the same way you'll rebuild your financial life, he said. One trustworthy action at a time, over many years, with no guarantee of success. That's harsh. That's reality. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. After hanging up, I called Samuel to report Mark's acceptance of our terms. Congratulations, Willard, he said. You've just taught a very expensive lesson about the importance of honoring contracts and treating people with respect. Samuel, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Thank me after the money's in your account. But yes, this has been one of the more satisfying cases of my career. It's not often I get to see justice served so clearly. 2 weeks later, the electronic transfer appeared in my bank account, $422,000, representing not just repayment with interest and damages, but validation that some fights are worth having. I printed the bank statement and filed it next to the original loan contract, creating a complete record of Mark's expensive education and personal responsibility. That evening, my neighbor Harold stopped by with a bottle of wine. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that your son paid up. He did. Good for you, Willard. You showed real courage standing up to family like that. We sat on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the quiet street in golden light. The same street where Cassidy had struck me 3 weeks earlier, where neighbors had witnessed my humiliation and rallied to support me. Harold, can I ask you something? I asked. Do you think I was too hard on them? Harold considered this carefully. Willard, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's enabling. Your son needed to learn that his actions have consequences. Better he learn it from you than from the world, which would have been much less forgiving. Later that night, I sat in my study with Mary's photograph, feeling something I hadn't experienced since her death. Complete peace. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet, my sanctuary, earned and defended, filled with the satisfaction of a man who had finally learned to fight for what mattered. Mark would recover from this financial setback, probably become more responsible for it. Cassidy would learn that charm and manipulation have limits, and I had learned that even patient men can find their strength when pushed too far. The phone would ring again someday. Maybe Mark would call to report progress in his life, or to ask for advice instead of money. Maybe Harold would call with neighborhood news, or Samuel with updates from other cases. But tonight, the silence was perfect. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace. At 68 years old, I had finally learned that some battles are worth fighting, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, is always worth pursuing. The contract was paid, the lesson was learned, and I was free.